Hello, hello, hello. Crafty Chris here for another Scrap Your Scrap Thursday night. Tonight I'm going to be using scraps from a very old paper pack, and I'm going to combine them in a couple of different ways to make 12 by 12 pages. And I'm not really sure what I'm doing, but I'm thinking about pinwheel kind of things and joining them all together to make a 12 by 12 page. So to begin with, I'm going to look at some things that maybe coordinate really well color-wise. Let's see what we have there. That's not too bad. What else do we have? So those two go really well together. Just pull these out for a minute. These are patterns. So I got two of these. They kind of go together. So that's 4 pages. I can actually maybe do a pinwheel there. And then I got 2 of these and 2 of those, and we'll work on what works with those in a minute. But this is 4 6 by 6 pieces, so that should create a 12 by 12 page. Now, I'm thinking of cutting them into quarters diagonally. I actually might even do halves and then half those, so that I can intermix all the different patterns. So let's give that a try and see how that works out. So the first thing I'm going to do is measure 3-inch cuts, and then by 3-inch cuts, and I just line up the same paper again. Okay, then I'm going to go in and trim from corner to corner. Try and get as accurate as I can. So there's that, and there's this one. Okay, and then this one. And then that one. And now I'm going to do the same for the second page. All right, and now we're going to start the same process with the pattern paper of the Christmas bells. That's bottoms and tops. Now I just separated these because these have a direction, so I want to make sure I'm doing bottoms and tops when I'm rotating the pattern. And I should point out you have to cut them all exactly the same, because if you go in a different direction, or maybe you don't. Actually, let's do one page in one direction and the other page in a different direction. Just I don't know how that'll work, but we'll see what happens. Okay, so this one I'm going to cut on that angle, and let's see if that works out. All right, so now I'm cutting it on this angle. So let's put one together. So if we start with a corner, then an inside corner, then an upper corner, what if we did that? Then an upper corner, here. Then different corner there. And a lower corner here. So this I need to change to that. And that needs to be this. I knew there was a reason I needed to cut one sheet one way and one sheet the other way. So this is what we want to create. Whew, okay, so yes, with your directional papers, you have to cut one sheet in from bottom left to top right, and the other sheet from top left to bottom right. To make sure that this whole thing happens. With the pattern paper, you don't really care about that. All right, so now we're going to piece this together. And I am using just this yellow tape. You can use washi tape, anything you want to get rid of. The diagonals aren't as important to get secured as the cross pieces are. So let me just... At this point, something happened to my audio, and so everything is going to be voiceover now. I am looking at the squares and just making sure after each time I tape something, I'm going to be able to rotate in the right direction so I get that pinwheel effect. You also want to double check that your pattern is going in the right direction and that everything is the right side up, because that can get very confusing when you're doing this technique. Now that we have the quarters done, we're going to flip over the halves and put in our connecting tape to have everything come together. So I do 2 halves first. Make sure to align the center points. So you want to have the centers of the papers, because if your cutter is inaccurate or you slip or something happens, you want to have those interior pieces match up in the center so that you don't have a gap showing. It's time to put your final piece down the center to attach the 2 halves. That's when you want to align the center point. And now you have your finished quarter, and we need to now make 3 more. Here we have our 4 finished panels, and we need to make sure that we do 2 things that are very important. Each quarter has to be in the proper direction, so you want to double check that is happening. And in the same way that we try to make sure that when we're taping, we're making the center connect, we are doing the same thing with these large quarter panels. Now, the next step is to, in the same way we did with the smaller squares, we're going to flip over 2 of the halves and tape them, and then the other 2 halves and tape them, and then tape them finally into the 12 by 12 sheet. Here we are with the finished 12 by 12, which looks quite nice. I do know which photos I'm going to be putting on there, so I know that I'm going to be using 4 by 6s and 4 by 4s. And I need to get a matte color paper, so I chose a green paper that's kind of an olive color, and it shows up throughout the entire page and matches quite well. So my next step then is to create my mats and get the photos on the page before I begin to decorate. Often I will use the back side of textured paper. Depends on how fussy the original base is. If the base is very decorative like this particular one, then I will use a the back side rather than the textured side. Often I will actually cut the insides out of my mats to save some paper. I just feel it's a big waste to leave all that extra paper behind a photo, and then I can use that in my scraps on other projects. So in a moment you'll see how I go about doing that. What I do is I take a point and a ½ inch down from and a ½ inch out from the corner, I will cut within the paper line down to a ½ inch from the end. And then I rotate that and go from the ½ inch I cut at the top down to a ½ inch before the bottom as well. So making sure I'm creating a frame underneath the photo. And it's very easy to do, and you can do it very quickly, and it doesn't matter what shape the, the actual mat is, as long as it's angular, so that you can get those cuts in and measure it ½ inch around the outside. So sometimes my cutter doesn't cut right to the very end, so I just go in with my fussy cutting scissors and I just snip inside the scissor. Now these scissors that I'm using right here are Bumblebee, and they're great for doing cutting, but the tips of them don't snip very well, and you'll see later on in the photo, or in the video rather, that I switch out for my spellbinder ones because the tips on the spellbinder ones actually snip right to the end. So you'll see that I struggle just a tiny bit here trying to get those little corners out because the scissors, I can't go and use the tips on those. Once it's finally cut out, I just make sure that the mat is looking even, because sometimes there's like a little bit of hairiness at the corner or something. And here you can see that there's like a 1/16 of an inch all the way around. Final measurements are 6 1/8 times 4 1/8 and 4 1/8 times 4 1/8. Now it's time to sort of lay things out on my page. I usually start with my photos. I've got two 4x6s and a 4x4. I need to make sure that I have enough space to get everything on the page. And I start off by doing it horizontal and vertical, but I always end up messing that up and going for a jaunty angle at some point, because I find it's a little bit more interesting to look at. It kind of activates the page and makes it, whatever's happening on the page, a little bit more energetic and interesting. And sometimes the angle that I start with is a little too jaunty, and then I end up, messing around with it for a little bit, and then it comes to looking something like what I've got here. Once I have an idea of where I want things to lay down, then I go ahead and put my adhesive on my frames and line them up. And I usually start with the smallest one because that gives me sort of a sense of where the larger two pieces are going to end up. And it also gives me the angle that I can align. I usually eyeball, but certainly you can use a ruler if you're fussy that way. But I'll eyeball the angle and try to align my pieces according to the initial piece I put down. Once I have the frames down, then I take my picture holders and I just take a little bit of tape. I always have little bits of pieces of tape that I reuse just to hold them in place to give me a sense of where photos will be. So when I go to the next step of decorating, I have less of a hard time trying to figure out where the decorations go. So at this point I have one page more or less done in terms of the layout, and now I need to work on the second page to recreate that pattern in the background using different paper, but paper that will go with what I'm using on the other side. Now these patterns tend to be a little bit aggressive, so I don't want to overwhelm the other page. I want to keep it kind of simple, and I need 2 pages of the pattern for sure. And I think I figured out while I was going through these that I really only had 1 page of all the rest of the things. So I took the most neutral 2 pages to create the bottoms, and I was very particular because I didn't want it to be too jazzy and take away from the photographs. Once I've decided the 4 pieces that I'm going to use, I have to use the same theory that I did with the other, which is try to figure out the direction of the pieces. These reindeer pieces are the reindeer are all in different directions, so that's not my big worry piece, but the directionality of the crisscross piece there, the diagonal plaid, um, might make a difference. And then the beige one is fine. It can go in any direction at all. So I just have to be a little bit careful. What I did do when I was cutting up my papers is I tried to keep that, you know, 4 pieces in one direction, 4 pieces in another direction idea going so that there would be some kind of logic to my pages. For these deer, because they go in all different directions, what I try to do is look for, once I've cut them, I tried to look for individual deers that were sort of standing upright and tried to make sure that my corners each had an upright deer in them, which became a little bit problematic near the end because I ran out of corners with upright deers. Anyway, but you'll see further along that it all worked out. Now it's time to put this whole thing together. I found this second page to be more challenging with 3 different patterns than the first page with only the 2 different patterns. So going forward, I think what I would do is make sure that I had just the 2 patterns to work with and leave it at that. So you will see that I'm sort of trying to figure out how I'm going to work with the 3 different patterns. And it took me a little bit of time to figure it out because there are 4 quadrants. 2 patterns works better than 3 patterns because it's an even number. So that was the actual challenge that I had because I was working with odd numbers. So once I got the 2 other patterns sorted out, now it was time to figure out the deer. And my theory of trying to get an upright deer in each panel um, was for the most part successful, but I found that there was 2 corners in, or 2, 1 corner in each of the 4 quarters that I couldn't find an upright deer to put in. So I kind of gave up that theory and went back and just let it happen as it happened and just made sure that I could get as many things in the right direction as I possibly could. So again, just taping in the same manner I taped the first page to finish off the quarters, and then all 4 quarters put together to finish the page. It did take me a little bit of time to rotate things so that I felt like the patterns were spread out enough that they weren't all sort of going in one direction or um, looking a bit overwhelming. And I did have to, as you saw, turn the page around a couple of times to get the side that I really liked on this one because it was more abstract than the others. Now the next steps, of course, were to go through the same process in cutting mats. I think on this one I had 3 4x4s and one 4x6. So the final measurements of the mats would have been um, 4 1/8 by 6 1/8 and 4 1/8 by 4 1/8 for those mats. And of course I cut out the centers of them so that I could use them for other things. So one thing that did happen was that, of course, with every time you make mats out of a 12 by 12, you don't necessarily get enough left over to do even mats. So here I'm actually measuring things because I'm going to compile all of my extra pieces into finished mats so that one page will, in effect, do all the mats I need with the fact that I put 2 pieces of together under one mat. And to do that, all you need to do is make sure that you're lining up the edges and you have a nice straight cut, and that you force those up on the back side, you force those pieces together before you tape them so that the seam is invisible. I was able to get the basic 4x4 and 4x6, but I had to piece together the other pieces, and you can see how I'm doing that. The piece I'm creating is much larger than I need, but I don't, when I'm so close to the edge of, like when I only have 1/4 of an inch that I need to add on, I try to make it larger so that my seam doesn't get close to the edge where you can actually visually see it. So I want it somewhere closer to the middle when I'm finished. So here you just see me putting the pieces of paper together, and I am forcing those corners together so that I cannot see um, any gap between them. And I also am putting in tape at the ends because that's where they're going to separate if they do any separating at all. So you want to make sure that they're really tightly put together. Sometimes you'll put 2 pieces of paper together and they won't immediately match. So what I tend to do is I just rotate the papers until I find a match that looks very good. And what I'm looking for in a match is that both sides butt up very nicely together. And I try to have either a top or bottom match as well. And once I found that, then I can go ahead and do my taping. So I have finished doing my actual mats, and I am deciding whether and what pieces I need to cut out. But the pieces that I've already sort of pieced together, I'm going to ignore those ones. I'm going to let them stay as they are underneath the mats, and I'm going to now make the half-inch frame around the pieces that are solid pieces. In the same way I organize the photo mats on the other page, I'm going to now do an opposite organization, so mirroring the angle of the other page, using the 4x6 and the three 4x4s, but I need to have my other page so that I can kind of make sure I get the angle as close as possible, you know, like it doesn't have to be exact, but in order to have some flow, you want to have that jaunty angle in the mirror on the other side to balance the two sides. You can't have them all going in the same direction across the two-page spread. It just makes you feel like you're going to fall off the page. I'm just double checking the angle. So at the bottom of my 4x4 is kind of the same distance away from the bottom of the 4x4 on the left-hand page. And now that I like what I'm seeing, I am going to be adhering them to the page at that jaunty angle. So now we have our two-page spread, and there is an overall flow of the colors from one page to the other. And even though they are two different pages, they look very similar. So now I'm pulling out little bits and pieces of the same collection pack I had. There's some paper that I can fussy cut out the poinsettia. I'm just looking at the stripes and the dots, and I'm thinking they're a little too activated, and the little snowmen are cute, but they're just not going to do anything for the page. So we're going to stick with those poinsettias. I do need a journal spot, so I found some of the plainer paper that has some lines on it that I can use for journaling. So I decided to pull that in, and I think that the rest is still pretty pale, so I wouldn't add that. I like these little strips because they have potential to add just a little bit of detail to the page. It's all in the details, you know. And I pulled out a little bit of background paper because I want my journal box to stand out, and I want people to be sort of guided towards that journal box. And right now I'm looking for a second piece of paper, and then I might be able to put underneath that to give that more zhuzh. So I'm basically going through my little bits and pieces and pulling aside things. And then I come across some red pieces, and this large red sort of burgundy piece I decided was a good color to have behind, but it was just a little bit small, so I was hoping to find a larger piece like that. I remembered that I had some letters that that were white that I have a tendency to color, so I got a brownish color that kind of blended in with the background and those white letters. I cleared away some of the mess on my desk and kind of figured and narrowed things down to what would really work, and pretty soon I was ready to roll. In that I didn't have a big enough piece for the red background, I did have two pieces. So again, here is where I'm going to um, stick them both together and create a big enough piece to go behind that journal spot. Often when I'm doing things like this, I kind of measure on the fly, so I don't really have a set size that I'm thinking of to fit in a space. I kind of just look at the space I have available, look at the pieces of paper I have available, and I just use my ruler and measure out what I need to cut off on the fly. All of the measurements for the pieces of large mats and journal spots and stuff, I will put in the text that goes along with this video. I am just um, taking paper and seeing if it can fit into the colorways that I'm using, things like strips and whatnot, adding them to the bottom of photographs just to give an extra little oomph to the photograph, maybe bring them up from the page a little bit as a decorative element. Did really like the little pieces of strips of paper. They were very handy to go underneath and give a little bit of spunk to the bottom of the photographs. I thought it would be nice to add a little strip of red on the sides of the photographs that I don't have a piece underneath. So this meant that I would have pieces underneath some and pieces along the side of some. I really like this poinsettia piece because it had greens that already occurred in the background paper and reds that kind of popped. So this is the one I ended up choosing. Cut these pieces into 1/4 inch slices. So for all of the bottom pieces, and even for the vertical pieces, I decided I didn't want it to go the whole length of the picture. So I cut 1/4 inch off of the end of each, and I aligned them, um, depending on the page, to the left or the right. So if it was the left-hand page, they aligned with the left-hand margin. If it was the right-hand page, they aligned with the right-hand margin. With the vertical pieces, I decided that I would line them up with the bottoms, um, and cut them again that 1/4 inch shorter than the actual picture. I added one to the side of the sentiment strip as well. So I located in this paper pack a couple of pieces of paper that had poinsettias in in them, and I thought it'd be great to fussy cut those so that I could use them to decorate. So I did that off screen, and now we are about to sort of place the different items on the page. And basically, I cut some of the the snowflake shapes out, which I'll pop dot, and I cut out some of the poinsettia pieces, and I even cut out some of the poinsettia pieces that were on the edge of the page because they're great for filling in and just putting off the side of a photo just to fill up a spot. So here I'm just showing you the different versions of things I have. You will have whatever's in your collection. Uh, and it doesn't matter if you have two of the same, one of the, or they're all independent and individual. So in gluing down the little strips that were going underneath the photos, I changed my mind on the directions. So instead of having the left-hand side pieces with it butted up against the left-hand side, I used the right-hand page and butted up the pieces to the left-hand side. And then the left-hand page, they were butted up to the right-hand side. I don't know why I changed my mind. That just looked better that way at the time. And I did go about making sure that all of the pieces that were going vertical started at the bottom and went up. And then we're just short of the top of the page to give it a bit of dimension. Once all the side pieces were done, I decided that I'd like to make them even more visible by using my Nouveau Clear glitter pen, and I just went right over top of the entire strip and highlighted the strip so that it would sparkle and show more interest in the page. And I am, in a moment I will bring that to the camera and show you what that looks like. And here's what it looks like. You can see the sparkle in the bottom. And I think I'm just adjusting the lights here so that it's a little more visible for you. See how that sparkles? It just catches the eye a little bit better. Now with that having been completed, it's time to start to organize what flowers are going to go together. My thought process on this was just compiling pieces of poinsettias and the two different styles into my layouts so that I could have a sort of even all over look. The other thing I wanted to do was to make sure that the flowers and the leaves were all pointed, so I used my thumb to just curl those all the way around. And in some cases, I even trimmed away the outside edge of the poinsettia so that I would have the poinsettia on its own, and then I could put slip the leaves underneath after I'd pop dot the poinsettia. So there's in this one that you see in front of you right now, I am going to put a pop dot in the center of the flower, and I'm going to glue halfway on the leaves around it so that the tips still curl up and the poinsettia itself is pop dotted. This poinsettia, I trim, as I said, the leaves off so I can round the flowers and make the leaves pointy and have some 3 dimensions to it. In decorating my 2-page layouts, I tend to start with the left-hand page, and I try to squeeze the right-hand page in there so it can get an idea of how everything looks overall. It's not so much that I need it balanced in a way that I have identical what's on one side to the other. I just need to have sort of a visual weight that balances between the 2 pages. And because these background pages are fairly neutral, even though they're quite active, they have neutral colors, and the reds will pop off the page on these. And so I just start to lay things out. Sometimes I get it right the first time. Sometimes I have to go back and move things around a little bit. I will be adding those snowflakes in, but they went in last. So at this point, I'm getting things sort of organized. I'm understanding that I need to leave room for a title, which will go between the two large poinsettias up at the top there on the left-hand page. And just again, to repeat, that the poinsettias, I curl up the edges and then put a pop dot in the middle and glue down the outside edges so that it gives it sort of a bit of a pop but curled edge idea. And the cutting for the outer edges of the larger poinsettias really gives that three-dimensional look. And last minute touches with the snowflakes. And now it's time to glue everything down. Here I'm showing you that the pop dot underneath the poinsettia sets the leaves off that are bent down and turned up on the other side of that image. One thing that I do like to do is to overlap the photograph and the frame, the mats of the photographs, not to the point where you're actually sticking the glue onto the photo, but just if there's a pop dot, I leave the pop dot cover on until the photo's in there, and then I take it off and then I will stick it over. But if I glue it down, I just glue to the point where the paper touches the underside of the flower, so that it gives that sort of drapey look over the photo, but isn't stuck right down to the photo. So here I'm showing sort of a side view. Whoops, I lost a snowflake. I'm showing you a side view so you can see the amount of depth that I'm getting in those flowers and how it pops up from the page. So the color makes them pop, but also that they've been dimensionalized, if that's a word, and you can see how it builds the look of a page. Here I'm adding not Wink Castella, but Nuvo clear glitter to the snowflakes, and I'll do that to all 3 or 4 snowflakes that I have. I also am going to put clear glitter in the center of the poinsettias, following the yellow stamens that are in there. In the smaller flowers, the stamens are too tiny, so I usually just make a round circle around the stamens. But in the larger ones, I can actually get the pen to go into the actual stamen and leaving a space between the glitter, which is kind of fun and a nice little detail. Now that the left side of the two-page layout is done, we're going to focus on putting together the right-hand side, and it's exactly the same as what you saw on the left-hand side. Just adding some last minute glue to the, or pop dots to the snowflakes and putting them in. And then we'll be moving on to the wink of Stella. On occasion, I like to add glossy accents to particular things like the centers of flowers. Now, I already have glitter in here, but if I add that dimensional aspect of glossy accents, I can build another layer of texture or depth to the flowers. So I'm just going over all the stamens with the glossy accents, and I also go over the entire snowflake with the glossy accents as well. And here's what the glossy accents look like on the sparkly surface. Very pretty. And that's the second page done. And now here's both pages together. With the glossy accents, of course, you have to make sure you don't stick your fingers in them. And you can see all the glittery, glossy goodness on the pages with your journal spot. The only thing that isn't in there is the title. The title I'll be adding after the fact. You will see it in the finished image at the beginning of the video. And that's it for another Thursday night Scrap Your Scraps. If you enjoyed this video, please share with friends. And don't forget to sign up by subscribing at the end of the video under the video. Bye for now.